Good day to you all, and welcome to the opening session of the ninth annual American Climate Leadership Summit. I want to just thank you, Reverend Dorfauer, for the opening prayer. I am here today with Dr. Naomi Oreskes, one of my personal climate heroes. She should be one of yours. Naomi is a professor of the history of science at Harvard, and that barely scratches the surface of her capabilities and accomplishments. She is the preeminent forensic criminal investigator of climate denial. She enables what we call opposition management. 15 years ago, Naomi opened up our eyes to the scientific consensus on climate change. She asked if climate change is real and it's caused by people and really dangerous, why aren't we doing anything about it? And then 10 years ago, she answered that question when she released a book called The Merchants of Doubt with Eric Conway. They explored man-made climate denial and the mendacity of large polluters who deliberately and surreptitiously spread lies and doubt to stop the regulation of pollution and other things that hurt people on the planet. The movie version of Merchants came out in 2015, and it remains one of the best documentaries of any kind that I've seen. So Naomi has done as much as any of us to move society to climate solutions, and she's now expanding her sights into free market ideology, and with her newest book, Why Trust Science, on the essence of science itself. Trust is out now in hardcover and Kindle, and will be out in paperback next spring. And just brush up on your philosophy a little bit before you dig in. Hi, Naomi. How are you?
Hey, Bob. I'm great. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah. I tried to keep that as brief as I could, and I don't feel like I've done you justice, but let's get on with it. We talked about the two themes, merchants and trust, and I'm sure I and our audience have a lot of questions. But why don't, before we get into that, why don't you just take the helm and share any opening insights or top of mind thoughts you might have?
Well, thanks for the generous introduction. I guess I could say something about what I'm working on now. So as you mentioned, in Merchants of Doubt, one of the things we were trying to understand was what was driving people to deny the scientific evidence of climate change, because the scientific evidence is overwhelming. It has been for a long time. We've known since 1988 that climate change is way, and we've known since that time it was caused by people, that this was not just natural variability. And so what we showed in that book was that a great deal of climate change denial was driven by market fundamentalism, by the ideology that governments are ineffective, that markets are very efficient and effective, and therefore we're better off just leaving things to the marketplace. Well, that's a failed ideology. We know it's not true. Climate change is a market failure. The economy as we know it has given us this crisis and has not given us a solution. It's given us pieces of potential solutions, but it hasn't put them together in anything like a meaningful way. Nick Stern, the former chief economist of the World Bank, has called climate change the greatest market failure ever seen. And so in our new work, Eric Conway and I are just digging in deeper to that to try to figure out, how did we become persuaded of this bankrupt ideology, and how do we get past it? Because I think until we recognize the scale of the failure, both in terms of the actual sort of facts of what we've done, but also in terms of our thinking, I think it will be very hard for us to break through this. And so that's what I'm working on now. That's little small problem of how we think about the problem.
Yeah, we need the resets I was talking about in that opening piece there. But you know, when you talk about climate denial, everywhere you look, from the Juliana case to cities and states suing big oil, there's a BBC radio series going on right now that's called Why We Doubt Everything. And even Sheldon Whitehouse's speech on Tuesday on the Senate floor was about dark money and those kind of influences. So everywhere you look, I see influence of Naomi. And the question is when you look at your work, what do you think has been the biggest influence of it all?
Well, that's very difficult to say. I don't think any scholar, any person can really be objective about their own contributions. And I always go with the philosophy that you should never believe your own press releases. So I don't know. I guess if I were to say what I hope has been the biggest contribution, or at least an important one, is that I want people in a way to feel better about themselves, because it's easy for us to blame ourselves and to think, you know, we haven't done enough, we didn't work hard enough, we didn't study hard enough, we didn't stay on the issue enough. And I don't think that's where the blame here lies. One of the things I like to say is the reason the American people have been confused is because people have been deliberately trying to confuse us. What we documented in Merchants of Doubt and what we're documenting in the new book is a systematic campaign over decades to deny the scientific evidence, not just of climate change, but of all the market failures, all the environmental failures, all the failures of wage equity, the failures of inequality, the failures of structural and systematic racism. I mean, all of these realities have been systematically denied by powerful people in this country who have not wanted us to have an honest conversation about how our system works and how it doesn't work, where we've had legitimate success and where we've had very serious failures. So we have been, in a way, denied the opportunity to have that conversation. And so I see part of the reset that you talk about, part of the task that's in front of us, is to break through that and to say, no, this has been effectively a con job. This is a big lie, and we're tired of being conned. We're tired of the big lie, and we need to break it open and talk seriously about the truths. And for me, especially these last few weeks and months, watching, everything that's going on in this country, which is both terrifying and amazing at the same time, one of the big lies of American history is the lie that there's been equal opportunity for all citizens. We know that that's false, and yet we've somehow lived with that falsehood for a long, long time. And so that's a big lie. And the other big lie is that there's no climate change. And we know that's false too. And now we have this moment where these two big lies have really been exposed. And that's scary, but it's also exciting. And as you've said, it's a giant opportunity for a fundamental reset, not just in terms of the little details of where we get our electricity, but in terms of the really big question about how we think about who we are and what we are as a nation and what we want the future to look like.
Wow. I couldn't agree more. I do want to tell everybody that's listening that there's an action center on the upper right-hand corner of your right-hand side of your screen. And if you have any questions for Naomi, feel free to type them in there. But Naomi, a lot of people don't know this, but you're a geologist too. You are an accomplished scientist. And so just on the technical side on climate change, people say it's a wicked problem with so many different causes and so many different solutions. It's just very difficult to manage it. Is that true, or might it just be as simple as stop burning fossil fuels and restore nature?
Yeah, well, obviously, you know what I think about this because you pretty much answered your own question. I really don't like the framework of a wicked problem for two reasons. First of all, it isn't actually all that complicated. I mean, the details of the science, yes, of course, the details of climate model. I mean, the details of almost anything when you dig in get complicated quickly. But the basic science of climate change is actually very simple. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We have known that since the mid-19th century for more than 150 years. And that means that when you put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, sooner or later the planet will heat up. And scientists have been saying that since 1899. The only real change, and this is what Jim Hansen deservedly gets credit for, is that he was the person, he and his team, who said, hey, guess what? This isn't just a prediction anymore. This is a fact. This is something that is happening to us now. And that was in 1988. So the basic science is really pretty simple. It's pretty basic physics. And the same with ocean acidification. You put carbon dioxide into the ocean, it dissolves in seawater, you produce carbonic acid. This is freshman level chemistry. Carbonic acid dissociates and the ocean gets more acidic. So the basic science is really very simple. I could explain it to anyone in the audience in 5 minutes. There are some complicating details about clouds, but if you gave me another half hour, I could explain those too. And we've known this for a long time. The part of it that's complicated is the political pressure not to act. And so that's why I like to say this isn't a wicked problem, but there are some wicked people out there. There are some people who are truly wicked, who don't care who they hurt, who are prepared to say anything or do anything to sustain the power of the fossil fuel economy and to continue business as usual. And that, I believe, is wicked. I think it's truly evil, but I don't think the problem is wicked. And I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah. I've heard you say something like that before, and I really don't understand how people can, surreptitiously hire an advertising agency and pay people to go out and lie about their products, and they don't suffer any consequences, any liabilities. Is there anything out there that we can do to cause people to be responsible for the things that they say, the lies that they make, and
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot we can do. Obviously, my role in this has been the exposure part. I mean, I'm a big believer that sunlight is a disinfectant, that mold grows in dark places. And when we can expose these things, show the big lie for the lie that it is, that's a wake-up call for people. And I think that's what's been most gratifying to me about my work, is how many people have written to me, called me, come to lectures to say, wow, I had no idea. And now that I know, I'm going to respond differently, because the way you act, what you think you need to do, is different if you think this is a confusion versus if you think it's a lie. And then the other part of it, which I'm not personally involved in because I'm not a lawyer, but we have all across the country and the world people with legal acumen, with legal skills, bringing lawsuits, bringing cases to try to hold this industry responsible for its actions, to ask for, to demand accountability. We're seeing it in California, the Philippines, in various places in Europe. And I think this is terrifically important on two levels. One, it's just practically important because cities like San Mateo, Imperial Beach, San Francisco, and all across the country are going to have to pay enormous amounts of money to protect themselves and their people from sea level rise. And the taxpayer is going to be footing the bill. So this is yet another example where we see capitalism for the rich and socialism, for the damages, right? They want us to pay for the price of what they have done. And so this is a way of getting fiscal accountability and making the polluters pay, which is a very basic legal, moral, and environmental principle. But it's also important from a social standpoint because we know that lawsuits are a kind of way of informing people about what's going on in the world. One reason I became interested in the possibility of using legal remedies to address climate change was because of the work I had done on the history of tobacco. And one of the things we saw in that story was that, similar to climate change, the scientific evidence of the harms of tobacco goes back a long way. Scientists knew for sure that it caused cancer in the 1950s, and we had pretty good evidence going back to the 1930s as well, although some of that evidence got discredited because of its association with Nazi Germany. But actually, scientifically, it was true. It was good work. So the tobacco industry knew this, scientists knew this, but it was very difficult to get social change, in part because of the work of the tobacco industry to suppress that information. So how did that information come out? How did the American people learn that tobacco was so dangerous and that the tobacco industry was not acting in good faith, but was in fact lying about their product, in some cases even trying to make their product even more addictive than it already was? And the answer is that we learned a lot of that through lawsuits, through legal discovery, through the process of exposing this to the light of day through legal means. And so I think that this model is very important for people in the climate movement and for those people who have legal experience, legal lawyers and people who know something about the law, thinking through the various different ways in which legal remedies can be brought to bear, I think is a very important, powerful tool that we have at our disposal.
So you've done more than anyone to shed light on the mendacity of the tobacco industry and the fossil fuel industry. They can't deny climate change anymore, and they move on to other arguments like it's good for you, there's nothing we can do about it, it will cost too much to solve it. Where are we in that string of big lies right now, and where are they going?
Well, one thing we have to credit the fossil fuel industry is for if they're not anything if not flexible, they're adaptive, they believe in adaptation, they believe in recycling, they recycle old refuted arguments. So one of the things we've seen over the course of the last 30 years is that when a certain argument becomes impossible to say with a straight face anymore, they'll shift. So they'll shift to a different argument, like instead of saying, oh, there's no climate change, since obviously we know that's not true, they'll say, well, we just have to adapt. And we've seen this many times before. So again, I think the important lesson for our audience is don't be tricked by this. Do not be fooled by the fossil fuel industry claiming to have turned over a new leaf and say, oh, well, we understand that climate change is real, but we think the solution is adaptation. Or we understand that climate change is real, but we really think this is a matter of personal responsibility. These are all variations on the same theme of denial, denying the centrality of fossil fuel production, denying the centrality of the industry, and denying the fact that this is not simply the responsibility of all of us, because we live in a world where we don't have the choice in many cases to live without fossil fuels. And part of the reason we don't have that choice is because the fossil fuel industry has deliberately stopped, prevented, delayed, stalled all kinds of actions that would give us better choices. And you mentioned the beginning, Tesla and electric cars. I mean, the technology to create electric cars is more than a century old. Why don't we have more electric cars? Why have we had to wait for Elon Musk? Well, anyone who ever saw the film Who Killed the Electric Car knows the answer to that question. We know the role the fossil fuel industry has played in blocking public transportation in this country, in eliminating the streetcars in Los Angeles way back when. There is a long history, a century-long history of the fossil fuel industry working, even, dare I say, conspired. I'll use the word conspire in the general sense, since I can't prove that it's a legal conspiracy, although it may well have been. But the fossil fuel industry has systematically worked to build a world in which we are dependent on fossil fuels. And in that sense, again, it's a very strong analogy with the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry worked to make us addicted to tobacco, and the fossil fuel industry has worked to build a system in which we don't have the choices that we want. And so fighting back to create those choices, to support the electric car industry, to support utilities, to move towards renewable, this is a crucial part of the fight right now. And all across this country, really courageous local groups are taking on this fight. And it's super important that we support and back those efforts.
We've got a variety of questions that have come in, and one of them is about COVID and climate change. That, do people have the basic understanding of the biological threat of COVID and how that relates to the existential threat of climate change? What do you see as the connection between those two things?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. I don't think we know yet how people's scientific understanding of viruses plays a role in what we've been experiencing these last few months. But I would say that to me, the obvious connection is that COVID-19 has proved beyond any doubt, not just reasonable doubt, but beyond any doubt, what happens when you ignore science and when you disdain the role of scientific experts. I mean, scientists were telling us back in January that there was this bad virus that was emerging in China, that it was very serious, that it was novel, so that we would basically be facing a world without immunity to this virus. And that if we acted promptly, we could take steps to control its spread. And the Trump administration refused to do that, refused to listen to the science, refused to acknowledge the legitimate role of the federal government in protecting public health, and insisted that, like climate change, that it was a hoax, or that it was being exaggerated by Democrats, or that it was a Chinese virus, all the usual disinformation that we've seen. But I think so much of it was rooted in the Republican resistance to the role of government. It's not the whole story, but it's a big part of the story, right? We have lived with 40 years now of being told that government is the problem, not the solution. And so when we faced a problem in which the clear responsibility of the federal government to become involved, to coordinate the actions of the states, the Trump administration refused to accept that, and the Republicans in Congress essentially backed him up. Now, of course, it was amplified and made worse by the fact that the Republicans have also now, for nearly 40 years, disdained scientific expertise. And that's not a coincidence. These two things are intimately connected, because we live in a world where science is documenting problems like climate change, problems like the ozone hole, problems like novel viruses that emerge because of the destruction of habitat. Scientists are pointing out all these things that we need to fix. And so it's showing, science is showing how bankrupt, how ineffective the Republican ideology is. So it's not a coincidence that Republicans have turned against science. It's because they won't accept the reality that is in front of them. And so they're now trying to prop up a bankrupt ideology. And we see that this now is leading them to more and more extreme, actions, threatening the post office, trying to prevent people from voting. I mean, these are not the actions of people who have a robust philosophical system that can stand on its own merits. These are the actions of people who are committed to a bankrupt ideology, committed to immoral actions, and are going to more and more immoral steps to try to prop it up.
It's going to be interesting because we do have the election coming up in like 90 days. It's going to be interesting to see how America responds to the hyperactivity of these lies and mendacity. It's gone up exponentially in the past few years. So looking forward to that election. When we talk about COVID and climate change, one of the other sides of it is that we've been told that we don't have enough money to address climate change. We can't move that quickly. And it seems to me that our actions in response to COVID, even though they've been misaimed and poorly done, a lot of them show that we can put together $1 trillion. It's almost pocket change now as opposed to, so if we need the money and we need to move quickly to address climate change, we can probably do that. And my hope is that a lot of that happens right after the next election. Do you have any thoughts on the moving forward with solutions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question about the money because I'm not an economist and I don't know how serious it is that we've now, created a huge additional amount of debt that we will have to figure out some way to pay back. But I think you're absolutely right that this is always about political will, right? Because we've seen the way, we had the money when we needed a war in Iraq. We had the money, as you said, to pay the American people, to help the American people out during COVID-19. So it's not about the cash, it's about the willingness to spend money on things that one thinks are urgent and necessary. But I also think that the more important lesson of COVID-19 also is about, it's the old saying about, pennies, a stitch in time saves nine. I mean, if we had acted promptly, if we had spent modest amounts of money on ventilators and masks and contact tracing and testing, we would have saved the $1 trillion that we're now spending on the recovery and the wreck of the economy. I mean, the irony of all of this, and it's the same with climate change, Republicans, reactionaries, conservatives, climate deniers, whatever phrase you like best to describe them, even just fence sitters, will often say, we can't afford to fix this. And the truth is that it's far more expensive not to. And COVID-19 has shown that, again, without any doubt. Countries that took steps early, countries like South Korea, New Zealand, Taiwan, Germany, who had large-scale testing and contact tracing, yes, it cost money, but their economies are doing so much better now. They've saved so much more money than they spent. It was such a good investment. I mean, I don't know what the ROI on it is, but I'm sure that if you calculated it, it would be way better than just having your money in the bank or even most real estate, right? This was a gigantically terrific investment, and we refuse to do that in the United States. And it's the same with climate change. We have so many studies now from Nick Stern, from Bill Nordhaus, from so many economists in the United States and elsewhere that have shown that modest investments in renewable energy and energy storage, in grid improvements, will pay back many, many times over, both in terms of the economic activity that they will generate and in terms of the savings by avoiding climate damage. So, this is where it all gets weird because a lot of people claim that they're being rational, that they don't want to spend a lot of money, fixing climate change. This was an early climate change denial trope. We don't want to spend a lot of money fixing a problem that might not even exist. Well, this problem exists. And because we delayed, because we stalled, because we denied, we are now going to spend far more money than if we had actually acted back in the 1980s or 90s or even in the aughts. Every year of delay makes this problem more difficult to fix and therefore more expensive.
I think it goes back to what I call indiscriminate libertarianism, that they just deny it because they don't want government, even though it's staring them in the face. Some of these people that are asking questions seem to know you, Naomi. There's personal greetings here. And someone's asking about the restoration efforts, natural restoration of nature through natural means, through industrial means. What are your thoughts on that? Is that going to be a big help? Is it going to work?
Natural restoration like wetlands, that sort of thing?
Sure,
well,
yeah.
I mean, lots of studies show that natural restoration is one of the most cost-effective things you can do. So if you think about hurricanes, you think about New Orleans, Louisiana, the whole Texas Gulf Coast. I mean, climate change has made hurricanes worse. We have very abundant scientific evidence to show that. But we also know that things are worse because of the destruction of wetlands. Because wetlands provide a natural barrier, a kind of natural protection where storm surge and flooding is absorbed to a certain extent when you have natural wetlands. They also provide habitat for very diverse biological communities. So there's like a win-win-win in wetlands restoration. And in many cases, it is in fact quite a bit cheaper than some of the other alternatives. So absolutely, wherever there are opportunities for natural restoration. And I think the other thing we know, and this is something, I'm glad we started with a prayer today, because I live in a world, as you said, I was trained as a scientist. I live in a world where people are skeptical about talking about the restoration of the heart. People are skeptical about talking about the emotional and spiritual component of these issues. And yet those are so important. They're so important because ultimately that's what this is all about. This isn't about, rebuilding utilities. This is about having the things that make our lives satisfying and good for us. And, all of us who care about nature, who care about the environment, have always known that nature is good for us, that when we spend time outdoors, that when we go for a walk in the woods, we feel better. But now we finally have science on our side, because scientists have now finally proven what most of us knew all along, what Henry David Thoreau knew, what John Muir knew, which is that it's actually healthy to spend time in nature. Our blood pressure lowers, our T-cell counts go up. I mean, there's all this good scientific evidence to prove, again, what I said, what Thoreau knew 150 years ago, nature's good for us. And it's actually very inexpensive. A walk in the woods is one of the least expensive things you can do. And it turns out it's probably one of the best things you can do, not just for your mental health, but for your physical health as well.
I'm totally into nature as well. We only have 1 minute and 14 seconds left at this particular point. And I want to apologize to all the people that have questions stacked up here. We will go through those questions and maybe send Naomi a note and publish the answers because there are a lot of questions here, Naomi. Is there anything you want to say in the last few seconds before they cut us off here?
Just that it's been a pleasure to be with you, and I am so glad that so many people are committed to this issue, and I wish everyone well. Power to you, strength, and you're in my heart, and I wish everyone here the best of everything.
Well, thank you so much, Naomi. We didn't get to talk about why trust science as much as I wanted to. Maybe one of the other sessions later on in the summit will cancel out and you and I can get back on and we'll talk about science. But, thanks so much, Naomi, and talk to you in a little bit, and back over to somebody on the other side of the screen.